Okay, now we're going to be discussing Science 8 fluid movement in cells. This is the third part of 3 videos in this section. And this video is, or sorry, the screencast is going to be discussing uh, transpiration and the fluid or flow of water and air through plants. Okay, so we're going to look at plants and this movement of fluid or fluids from root to leaf. Okay, so again, we're still working on unit 2 or the unit cells and cell systems. General outcome 2, we're investigating and describing the role of cells within living things. And specific 2.4, we're describing the movement of gases and liquids into and out of cells during diffusion and osmosis based on concentration differences. So we've had prior knowledge and we have had prior discussions on levels of organization within living things, and we've talked about the similarities in terms of the composition of plants and, say, animals. In terms of that we are comprised of cells, and then cells build and form tissues, and then 2 or more tissues form together or join together to form organs, and then we can create organ systems within our body. And so this is just prerequisite knowledge, or this is just knowledge that's building up to that point, because we looked at plants, and plants have cells, plants have tissues, plants have organs, and they also have organ systems that carry out specific functions. So as we look through this, or as we go through this, it's important that we remember that we're going to be talking about cells and tissues, and cells being the basic unit of life, and then how we can build off those cells to create the functioning living organisms that we see in the world today. Just going to skip through a few slides again to get to this fluid movement in plants. So plants require a large supply of water to make sugars in the process of photosynthesis. Now this is a process that we're touching base on a bit. We'll touch base with it more in plants for food and fiber. And then you're also going to see this in high school quite a bit. So it's a pretty important topic. It keeps popping its head up, and with all, of course, it should be an important topic. So, but a group of cells, like I just outlined or I mentioned, a group of cells that perform similar functions are called tissues. Okay, so this group of similar cells that have similar functions, we call those tissue. And the transport of nutrients is the role of plant tissues. So basically the plant tissue's job is to take the nutrients that the plant needs and transport it throughout the plant to wherever it needs it, right? To all the different parts. And we know we have roots, we have stems, and we have leaves. And this fluid and nutrients are going to be moved through there. So what types of tissues do plants have? Well, vascular tissues connect the roots to the leaves, okay? We have phloem tissues that transport sugars manufactured in the leaves to the rest of the plant. And remember, sugars are going to be like the food for plants. Okay, and then the xylem tissues conduct water and minerals, and they're absorbed by root cells, and then it's distributed to every cell in the plant as it moves up through these xylem cells from the roots up all the way to the leaves, where eventually it's actually going to escape through these little tiny microscopic pores called stomata. So in the bottom we have bolded that xylem and phloem tissue usually occur together along the length of the plant stems and roots. So there's going to be a diagram that's going to illustrate what I'm talking about with that point. So keep that in the back of your brain because it's going to come up again. So here we're looking at 2 tissues. Okay, so we're looking at the xylem vessel and we're looking at the phloem vessel. So one of the differences is that the phloem vessel is going to be transporting sugars, and the and food from the leaves to the rest of the body. Now the xylem vessels are actually taking the water from the roots and transporting it all the way up to the leaves throughout every cell in the plant. So water in the xylem vessels is actually a one-way direction, whereas the phloem you can see as two-way flow. If you take a look here, two-way flow, and you can notice that there are waters and sugars in here. So there's water and food that are in here. Also, one difference is you'll notice here there's no end walls between the cells, so it's just free flow. And actually what happens is through osmosis, because there's a low concentration of water up in the leaves and a higher concentration at the roots, it creates this push and this pull. So it's actually pushing, and the leaves where there's low concentration will be pulling, and it forces this upward movement, as we see with these green arrows, up all the way from the roots up to the leaves. Now, that's in xylem vessels, but the phloem vessels are much different because they have these perforated end walls. And perforated means that it has small holes in it. I don't know if anybody's familiar with, say, weeping tile that goes around the base of your footing in your home and actually collects water that flows towards your house and that distributes it, and it, or it collects it and it actually takes it out in one direction of flow. It has small perforations that allows water to get in and and actually seep through, and then it's carried and taken out. So, but perforations, this is going to have small holes that are going to allow things in and out. So there's two-way flow, and the phloem vessels are actually going to transport the sugars, which are needed through the process of photosynthesis or created through the process of photosynthesis, and they're going to distribute that throughout the plant from the leaves on. Okay, so just the differences between the two tissues, and remember, the tissues were created by cells, and so cells are the basic unit of life, and then we build similar cells with similar functions are going to create these tissues, and again these tissues then are also going to help to develop what we call organs. So from the root to the leaf, so what's it look like from the bottom? So well, the bottom end, there's a root system that contains fine root hairs. Okay, so the hairs are extensions of epidermal cells, and these are the cells which protect the outside of the plant. When the concentration of the plant or of water is greater on the outside of these root hairs, then the water can pass through the membrane by osmosis. Now remember, we talked in the last screencast about osmosis and how water is permeable and it can move back and forth, and when it moves in or inwards from the out, it's actually going to dilute the concentrated particles on the inside. It's going to dilute those, and so when these through this process of it's going to water's going to be passed through this membrane by osmosis, and it's going to continue to pass through from cell to cell until it reaches the xylem tissue. Now, once it reaches the xylem tissue, that's where we get this push and pull with this highly concentrated or large amount, high concentration of water at the base of the roots and this low concentration of water up at the leaves. We're going to be pushing from the bottom and pulling from the top, creating an upward motion of water. And remember, there's no end walls in the xylem tissues, so it's free flow. And because the water molecules actually have an attraction and a charge, they're actually attracted to one another. It's called cohesion. And the water molecules actually bond to each other, and they pull up like a chain all the way up to the leaves, and then where they escape through the stomata, they're actually going to pop almost or push and stay attached until the next one, and it's as it releases, it's going to pull the next one up, almost like a Pez dispenser. If you guys are probably too young to know what Pez is, but they're delightful little candies with a Pez dispenser that just pushes up till the next one. So it's like a Pez dispenser. Maybe I'll bring it in one day and I'll distribute some Pez candies. So again from root to leaf. So those tube-shaped xylem cells then move the water by a buildup of water pressure in the root hair. So this is that pressure I was talking about, and there's low pressure up in the leaves. And so that's the low pressure. So we're going to get this high pressure forcing and this low pressure. We're going to get that push and that pull. So the water is then forced up the xylem tissue like it's like water in a straw. And then it goes into the stems and the leaves. So these leaves are of the plants. They're food producing organs. So now they're developed or they're built by tissues, and the tissues were then constructed by cells. So these organs, these leaves, this is where photosynthesis takes place. Now, photosynthesis takes place in the layer cells that contain chloroplasts. And remember, we were talking about the similarities and differences of animal and plant cells. Animal cells do not have chloroplasts. So plant cells have chloroplasts in cell walls, whereas animal cells do not. So these chloroplasts, this is where how plants make their food. Okay, and so those chloroplast cells, or that layer of cells, those are called palisade cells. So they're thin. They are allowing a large amount of light in. So they have a large surface area, and enabling the gases in the air to diffuse into the leaf cells. Remember, diffusion is taking a high or movement of particles from high concentration to low concentration. So we're taking high concentration of air and diffusing into a lower concentrated area inside the cell. So this diagram, I apologize it didn't come out very clear. It was clear on my PowerPoint, but right now it's not. But we can see right here, we can see these cells. So the pink is going to, or the cells right here, we're actually looking at the xylem cells and the phloem cells. And the xylem cells, that's the water. So they're taking water and minerals, and it's one-way direction up to the leaves. Now the phloem is actually two-way direction with cell ends, and it's actually going to move in two directions, and those cell ends or wall ends, they actually have perforations in them that are going to allow sugars and water. So there's basically food, water, and sugar, like the sugars and the water moving through there, and they go from the leaves and they're distributed throughout the plant cell. So it's kind of its energy. So the tiny openings, so this is the stomata that I talked about, and you're going to want to know what stomata are. They allow the air to enter the leaf, and they supply oxygen for respiration and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Okay, so the spaces between leaf cells allow the air to flow, and the guard cells open and close the stomata. So this guard cells is also something you'll want to know. It opens and closes the stomata. Now, the water cells actually they escape through the stomata, and there's tiny microscopic pores on the leaves. Okay, so the water, when it releases, it's actually pushed through. There's that push and the pull, and it attaches and it pulls the next water molecule. And remember that cohesion holds the water. But what happens is if there's too much water that leaves the cell, if it's not, then it can be a problem, because if there's not enough being absorbed by the leaves, or by the roots, sorry. And if the roots are collecting the water like they should, then what we get is it's no problem. This water is always escaping from the plant. But these guard cells are important, and the stomata cells are important because they allow air to enter the leaf. And this is where the air diffuses into the leaf and the cells. So now we talk about transpiration. That's kind of where we're headed here with this screencast. With we want to know fluid movement. So transpiration is where we actually lose water. So there's the loss of water in a plant, and it happens through evaporation, and it's called transpiration. Okay, so now evaporation, remember, is liquid turning to a gas in terms of changing of state and such. So this isn't a problem unless the plant loses too much water and does not replace enough by its roots. So those roots and those fine hairs, remember, they're taking in the water, and through the process of osmosis, water is entering the cells and moving from cell to cell until it meets the xylem tissue, and then it's actually going to make its way up in a one-way direction with that pull because of the high pressure in the bottom or the base of the roots and the low pressure in the leaves. So those pressures, and like I just talked about, it's creating a push and a pull, and it's actually pulling the water up from the roots all the way up throughout the whole plant up to the leaves, and then it's being released and escapes it escapes through transpiration and evaporation, but through the stomata, those tiny microscopic pores. So here's a little diagram. So it's showing down here water's absorbed through the roots and the root hairs, and it actually keeps going through cells, and it gets to the xylem tissues, and it actually flows in a one-way direction all the way up and is distributed throughout the whole plant where these blue arrows are. Then through the stomata, it's actually going to, through the sun, it's going to be evaporated and it's going to leave as a water vapor. And as long as there's enough water being absorbed in the roots, then these plants, it's not an issue. But as soon as there's lack of water in dry areas, then this water, this transpiration is actually going to cause a problem because then the plant's going to wither up. Okay, so here's some additional resources you can go to, some YouTube videos that I discussed. There's also a YouTube video on transpiration I would really like you to watch. It talks about the xylem, the phloem cells, and it talks about the process of transpiration. I hope that this has helped you out. Again, this is the third part of specific outcome 2.4, general outcome 2 in cells and cell systems. And I hope this helps you to answer the questions on your layered curriculum tasks. And I do apologize, the video is a little longer than usual. It had a lot of material, but I'll try to keep them a little shorter in the future. And again, I hope this has helped. I think this is a great tool for learning and giving you the ability to play, pause, and rewind and access this at any point in time with your devices. So remember, please bring your own device to class, and then make sure you turn your device on and you use it during class for educational purposes to help maybe view these screencasts and such. Okay, thanks for tuning in.